By the time Miralda comes to Miami in 1981, he was already an accomplished artist, mostly a self-driven kind of artist who in many ways was rethinking what it means to be a visual artist in today's society. It's not just about knowing how to paint flesh or feathers or any other material, but about how to bring all of this stuff into a live reality, into contact with people. Above all, in most of what you see throughout, there is no dehumidified white box anywhere. And that is one of his biggest accomplishments. So to go through the decades, these were some of his early works that involved, for example, at the top, the third one, he would go out in the street in New York and toss powders, color powders?
Rice, color rice.
Color rice.
Feeding the asphalt.
Yeah, there you go.
Feeding the
And then the rice became colored pasta and eventually colored many other things. His Fes für Leda, which was his documenta contribution, was an amazing production involving, I don't know, hundreds of people and black swans. And he continued, and at one point or another, he sort of reminisced about his career in the military, which is why he went to Paris. He went to Paris because Franco was still in power in Spain, and a lot of artists had to escape. Is that true?
Had to survive, yes.
And in the process of surviving, had to reinvent himself.
Sure.
And he did so with great verve and coloration, and in every way, amazing ways of connecting with aspects of religion, sociology, anthropology. So this artist was not somebody born out of Rex Art Supplies. There was a whole lot of other stuff going on. Many of these things are obviously photographed and presented in numerous publications. Prior to coming to Miami, he had done the great Wheat and Steak Parade in Kansas City that you saw. That involved the Texas Rangerettes and a whole layer of people in society. And then he began to work on more of making money things. He had to make money. So he and Montse Guillen opened El Internacional Tapas Bar in New York, which was a very successful place and a singular meeting point for the artists at the time. From Keith Haring through
Andy Warhol to, it was a non-stop place, very intense. 1 year and 3 months.
Keep the word intense in mind because we're going to come back and see more of that. So all of this had already happened by the time that Miralda comes to Miami. He was invited by our grand early philanthropist at the time, Mitchell Wilson Jr., who came up with this idea of doing a major arts festival that not only involved the visual arts, but also the performing arts. He commissioned an opera from Giancarlo Menotti and numerous other involvements that were to happen throughout the city. Miralda was the central visual artist. And as part of the team that worked with him and Montse Guillen and not too many, a few other people, we began to develop Miralda's ideas for various parts of the city. The central image is a double-tailed Catalan mermaid by Juan Jofre from 1520. This became not just an icon, but also something that became alive and people brought alive through many actions. Masks were printed, and people would wear them to the orchestra performances and to the various gatherings in the community. The mermaid became bread, and the mermaid itself became a fabulous table. This is a table with Monseguien in her dutiful attendance. And the table was staged and prepared for different events throughout the city. Sometimes with oysters and other kinds of ingredients, often with a more combined selection of possibilities that were made in Miami. For example, all of these breads in the shape of the double-tailed mermaid. The pieces at the top in her hands are brazos gitanos, which is a traditional Cuban dessert. And Miralda, at the same time, was researching other types of desserts that could be used for the sweet tables. There's another table. It was about this high, and the table was carved in styrofoam, sanitized and covered for every event, and then the ingredients were displayed. It was not just a display, it was a gustatory invitation for people in the audience to join us, join Miralda, in celebration and the moment of that particular event. At the Low Art Museum, we had to do a little negotiating. We wanted to have the table in the Crest collection room with all those wonderful Cinquecento, Quattrocento paintings there. But Ira Licht, who was the director at the museum, placed one condition: no fish. If there's fish in the table, then we got to do it outside, or we got to do it in the courtyard. So we went along, and the table, boom, was all deliciously covered with strawberries and blueberries and numerous fruits, bananas, and we connected with some people in Homestead, Miralda. I don't know if you remember. And there would be like short lists that would be made. We need 750 bananas. We need 400 pounds of strawberries. And those would all be used. As the project evolved, Miralda began to focus on specific issues that were of relevance to Miami at the time. One of the important ones was the Fontainebleau Deco cake. At the time, Barbara Capitman and various people were very much in arms about the historical buildings that were being destroyed. I never understood the reasoning for this. Miami Beach did not have a historical association or regulations at the time. So pretty much some of the people that were involved in these operations would show up with bulldozers, and down went the building. So his way of trying to deal with this was to commission from Cuban bakeries a series of large cakes that were replicas of the Deco buildings that had already been destroyed. That project never came to full fruition, but it was intended to be displayed in the lobby of the Fontainebleau Hotel. In that area above the stairs, there was going to be a platform built, and all the cakes were to be displayed there. Of course, all of this was accompanied by a very serious dialogue, not only about the Cuban pastries and the buildings and what was going on with historic preservation, but also the sheer magnificence of trying to convert dust and destruction into gustatory, delicious, sweet food. And it is that continuum that went on through the years. Other views of the, of course, these projects are not feasible within a short period of time, but the ideas remain in the drawings. And since that time, I was always asking him, Miralda, ¿dónde están los dibujos? Where are the drawings? I want to see the drawings. Are you organizing the drawings? So we continued that dialogue through the years. This was a proposal for the gardens at Vizcaya. It was based on, I believe, an etching by Lemoyne, who had been an artist that had worked in Florida in the 19th century. There's a foundation in Tallahassee with his work. And he had done an image of a grilling stand with like alligators and iguanas and other things. And of course, Adviskaya. So that did not happen. That did not happen at that time. But the idea remained alive, and at some point we knew that it would happen. The one project that did take place was at the Coral Castle down in South Miami. Most Miamians know the history of Ed Leeds-Kalnin, a Latvian immigrant who came to the States with the hopes that his 16-year-old bride-to-be would eventually join him. In the meantime, he kept himself entertained carving rock. And this is what resulted. A rock bed, rock living room, all kinds of amenities having to do with the stars. And the one sort of mystery that remains to this day is that people were not aware how this little teeny man could carve these rocks, lift them. He had great pulley and types technology that he could like wrap up a stone and tie it to a piece of wood. And
he said,
anyway,
he said then he used the T4, the el coche.
El coche,
Sí,
yeah,
la
to
estructura
move it.
del coche.
Right, to
Y
activate.
algún marciano seguramente.
Right, yeah, and there was also the idea that maybe he wouldn't acknowledge that he had, midnight visitors that would come with like real powerful equipment that could drop things down. Pretty much what you're seeing in the war now in the other part of the world. So this is a view of the royal castle. Another component was a sea serpent of the New World. This was to take advantage of the newly built seaport in Miami. At the time, Miami was not yet known as a cruise ship terminal. So Miralda came up with this idea of doing this snake, the sea serpent of the New World. And it was to have been built out of orange slices and other fragrant fruit. And it was big. We did a prototype that was from here to there like this, all in chicken wire, covered. So we had it all worked out. It was just a question of getting the people and the permissions and all that to do it. And that did not happen either. In many ways, I think, these projects were not really meant to actually be done.
I don't know. I call them projects. And for me, it's the same. Why they should be done? I mean, they're already there. I mean, you can see with the drawings. I mean, so it doesn't need to.
But that is an appeal to the imagination,
yeah.
and to people fostering and gathering the forces of the deities and religion and philosophy. And in a way, we'll get to this more, and Stephan will address this topic much more in depth. The one project that we did do and that did survive over the years was Santa Comida, holy food. This involved research with the various santeros, numerous santeros in Miami, of course based on the writings of Lidia Cabrera, Fernando Ortiz. At the time there was a lady, Mercedes Sandoval, who was teaching at Miami-Dade, who was also involved in all of these syncretic practices. How a Catholic deity would become a Yoruba deity. And as a result, then everything changed because the Yoruba deities ate particular kinds of food. They wanted the food served in a specific way. And we did a lot of research going around with Monse. And Monse was very persistent. She would say, but yes, this is corn gruel, and we can do it. But then the shrimp, and how do we arrange the shrimp? And what happens if it's not served the proper way? And so this was a very lively dialogue that continued and that began to take physical form. Those were us. Wacko birds! Woo! So Miralda began to produce drawings, many, many drawings of all aspects of the projects. These were early sketches, basically just a scribble something. But with time, they were refined and they became more specific.
Those were for Museo del Barrio.
For the first installation at the Museo del Barrio.
During an Internacional, during the time that we already had the Internacional in New York.
Right,
Yeah.
and then those altar pieces, as you will see, were fabricated and ended up, this was way later, in his retrospective at MACBA in Barcelona. There is a Gothic chapel next to the museum on the grounds, and Miralda produced this huge installation performance. The carpet on the floor is made up of different kinds of African textiles that he had used in another project. So in many ways, everything is of a piece, and everything gets together and continues to evolve. More specific information about the deity, a recipe, and notes about what they wanted. And this is not theoretical. This is actual belief. This is what a lot of these people have in their mind, live their lives, dress their parts. This is in Bilbao, and you can see this is the Chango, and here's this is Chango with a double axe.
Chango Yamaya.
And that's all.
Yamaya.
These were built with that technique from the 50s, where you see an image up front, but there are all these like thin fins. And if you look at an image from one side, you'll see something. If you look up front, you see something. If you look from the other side, you see something else. But imagine doing it in this scale, and further to dare to juxtapose these things to this type of Diana the Huntress neoclassical sculpture. This is the full production at MACBA. And the whole collection of soperas, which are the soup terrines that are the traditional servingware for the particular deities. Big Fish, Miami. These are images from some of the books, because I wanted to also show how, through the years, he was very, very careful in collecting and presenting his materials. This is a little joint right on the river. There was an old gentleman that would do fried fish. And I remember going there with like the judges, Judge Hoover, and other people to eat fish right on the river. This was a gas station. And then they came in and evolved it and developed a relationship with all of the, or many of the fishermen that would go up and down into their places upriver and would stop there to sell fish and eat and other things. The next place was in North Miami Avenue. It was called Meeting Point. And this was a place of gathering and of celebrating. I believe this was a presentation that was prepared for a group of the Andy Warhol Foundation that had come to Miami for an event.
So this was a transit place.
This was a transit, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Yeah. Transit in North Miami Avenue at around 27th Street. Other views of the workers in transit. And an important point to be made is that the workers were really integral and fundamental to the carrying out of the project. So Montse was very much into talking to all of them before the event, during the event, after the event, refining their practices. And it was a place where there would be great banquets for different purposes. Eventually, the shoe that was the gondola in Venice came back to the design district at Meeting Point. And this was like a luncheon place that our friend Craig Robbins sponsored. This piece, by the way, who owns it?
The Reina Sofia.
The Reina Sofia. That piece hung around Miami for many years in boat yards. You know how they put the boats in the thing and raise them? So I would drive up and down Biscayne Boulevard and see the shoe up there. But finally, it did find a proper home. There were so many, many, many drawings, so many, many things that he had done. And one day I got the look from him, we got to do a book. This is a book of drawings. More than 1,000 drawings, all by him. And my thesis was that from a little squibble, whatever, garabato, things would evolve and become and have a life. The book had a specific design. It was co-design, it's a collaboration between the two of us. It was done for Sa Nostra in Palma de Mallorca and for the Palau de la Virreina in the Ramblas in Barcelona. They had an initial sort of overview, chronological overview with photographs of all the projects and a couple of essays, one by Bartomeu Mari. And then at the end, because we didn't want the drawings were just like that, no text, nothing. But there was this that one could pull out, and you would be able to refer to whatever was going on in the drawing with a lot of information. This was a massive project. This took years because...
Thank you for insisting on making the book.
I would say, where are the drawings, you know?
Yeah.
And at this time, he was drawing on this very thin tissue paper.
Yep.
So that was further complicated because it's, oh yeah, we're gonna do a room and fill it with like whatever, antiseptics and dehydrants, but we didn't have to do that. It's my great pleasure that we were able to do this book. This is the front part. You can see a lot of the important projects. Looking at the top down, you see the variety of shoes. You see the project that happened up at the Trocadero, overlooking the Eiffel Tower.
And the honeymoon project, yeah.
That was part already of the honeymoon project, because all of this was just a listing. Mm-hmm. And then these are the pages, the the Rangerettes, the streets in the scene. You saw some of these live in the video introduction. To the beginning, a la marcha. Everybody had to go to the military service. And so we started with that. And then through the years, the drawings. These are the pull-out pages, some of the other images. In time, other serious and humongous books evolved. Up there, you see the piece, the Tri-Unicorn, that had been featured in the Kansas City project when it was being driven up the ramp. This is going into Miami Beach. You wouldn't know it if you look at the skyline. That's not the skyline today. This was, I don't know what year this was. This must have been,
I don't know, last century.
Last century. The Miralda book that was produced by the Reina Sofia, and it again had its own chronology, and then the Power Food Lexicon. Tell us about that.
Well, it was one way to put some order on the archive, and the archive is, of course, the main focus of the archive is food culture. And at the very beginning was this idea of food culture museum, and but that was too close for people to understand. Like, it's an institution, it's a museum. I don't want to make a museum. This was just giving the chance to understand that the food, around the food, the subject itself, should be treated like an institution. And at the very end, it's sort of, we moved the museum, it's food culture, food cultura. But yes, that book was published and with two institutions in Spain, in Artium and also Esboluar, and it's a lexicon about different information.
In the process, thousands of things were collected, including a huge collection of menus, which was eventually acquired by an institution in Spain. So a lot of what is here is also still in flux. These are images from the books and how they were presented. This was Wheat and Steak, the parade in Kansas City. You see the Tri-Unicornio there, the one that was going into the beach, which is now in the Reina Sofia as well. This was his ambitious project as part of the honeymoon of a desert banquet of sorts. Mm-hmm. How many limos?
Oh, just 22.
Just 22, right.
11 with the food from the new wall, 11 from the old wall. So it was like you open the...
The trunks had specific offerings of food, and that's how the audience interacted.
It was the wedding banquet.
A wedding banquet in the middle of the desert with directions, drive 4 miles north of Vegas, or that kind. This was one of his last projects connected to the Barcelona Olympics, and it was a falla. A falla is a tradition from Valencia where they construct these amazing images, and then they're burnt. And this was in there in the bay, and you see it burning. In this project, for example, the major collaborator was Fabián Martín, who was from a prominent family in Valencia of falleros, which are the ones that fabricate these things. This is the Infinity Table at Expo 2000. And this included numerous collections from the Fucultura archive. And they were displayed thematically and in different interrelated ways. This was in Hanover, Germany. This was one of the first iterations where the opened up chest appears, which becomes eventually Saint Stomach. And then there were many, many things that happened through the 90s and into this century, correcto?
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
so we're here again, century.
Yep.
The project also included a small home for agoutis, and the agoutis lived there. And the whole process of getting the agoutis through customs in Germany, you can only imagine.
It was a piece of art. Just getting them was a piece. Yeah.
He went on to do many other pieces through the years, the Power Food, Ode a la Papa. He went to Peru, where there are something like 800 species of potatoes, and he was able to work with the different people that were cultivating. We're wrapping up here. In one of the more recent projects, and a very relevant one at this point in history, it was sponsored by the French Cheese Association. So he did all these plates with the names of the cheeses displayed in a map of France. And in the middle, how can you govern a country which has 246 varieties of cheese? Charles de Gaulle. And we get to Maggie, that we're going to talk about.
Hey, Maggie.
This was the Maggie performance in Little Haiti. And we had a whole event with the community. This was across the bay at Faena with a major spectacular project. Look at that. 1, 2, 3, all Mercedes-Benz Jeeps in the same color. You figure what had to be done to get that to happen. And as a treat to him, and it was a bit of a surprise because he didn't really know we were working on this behind the scenes, we were able to do the alligator, the roasted alligator, which was served to the audience along with something like 11 food trucks that were lined up along Collins Avenue, free food for everybody by Mr. Faena. From then, he went on to continue to do many, many other things. And that's him. Taste and art invite us to share, to exchange, to give and receive, bearing in mind that diversity makes for a rich concoction. This book brings together many tastes, but it also urges us to continue furthering the knowledge and pleasure our bodies can still offer us. Bon appetit to all.
Antoni Miralda and I first met in person in 2016. But at least for me, we go way back. I almost met him several times in Lower Manhattan in the mid-1980s when Tribeca had barely begun to become trendy. Artist friends of ours then lived in a rent-controlled loft in a small warehouse on Leonard Street. Every time my wife and I visited them, we took the subway from Port Authority, which then was still a supremely seedy place, and got off at Franklin Street in West Broadway in front of a very strange-looking building. It was painted in white with odd black blotches like a Holstein cow, had a turquoise awning, and was topped with a probably life-size version of the crown of Lady Liberty. Only in America, I thought. Our friends didn't know what it was. A bar named Teddy, they ventured. Allegedly an old mafia hangout, now probably a gay bar. But of course it wasn't. It was El Internacional, Miralda's famous multidisciplinary performative art environment that doubled as the United States' first tapas bar. Complete with gorgeous food curated by Montseguillen and liberal dispensations of their trademark sea blue margaritas. I could still kick myself for never having walked in. Now, some 15 years later, I saw Miralda's magnificent installation Santa Comida at the Baltimore Museum of Art. I was then in my first teaching job in the United States at the University of Maryland in College Park, and worried about getting tenure as an anthropologist working on Afro-Cuban ritual in a fairly traditional history department. I took my students on a field trip there. Who is this guy Miralda? I thought then. He must be Cuban, perhaps a santero. But he wasn't.
Catalan.
That this was so only dawned upon me yet another 15 years later. At that time, I was on leave for having chaired my department at the University of Chicago, and upon a friend's invitation, I spent that year in Barcelona. It came out of the blue. There's this artist friend of mine, an Afro-Cuban PhD student named Caro Moret, said to me one day, he has a major retrospective at MACBA, including a reactivation of Santa Comida in the beautiful Convento de Angeles nearby. I think you'd enjoy meeting him. We all, including the show's curator, eventually met in the basement bar of the trendy Hotel Camper, whose bartender that evening had called in sick, so no fancy cocktails, just bottled beer. Conversation was a bit on the formal side, partly due to my own intimidation at meeting the mysterious, famous Miralda. Had I ever met an artist of international renown before? No, of course not. But the evening ended with Miralda inviting me to give 2 talks for sideline events to show at the Universidad de Barcelona and a final symposium featuring his Santero collaborator, John Mason, whom the MACBA flew in from its post at the Yoruba Theological Archministry in New York.
Amazing.
Needless to say, I gladly signed on. I had just published a book using the great Cuban polymath Fernando Ortiz's metaphor of the cooking of history as its organizing theme, and I've always thought that food is a great medium for organizing thought. Now, Miralda and I became friends soon afterwards, though I don't exactly remember how that was. I think you invited me to your Cueva de Ladrones in Poblenou, and then I think the 4 of us, Monse, you and Doris and me, went to Bar Joanet in the Rivera district for some cuina catalana, muy tradicional, no? But what I wanted to say, I mean, his cueva in Barcelona's old textile warehousing district, Poblenou, is, that is a place where lots of fortunes made in the slave trade and enslaved plantation labor were repatriated. For example, Gaudi's patron Gué's fortune was one of those. So at any rate, more meetings ensued, including in what Miralda came to call my segundo despacho, which was my neighborhood craft beer bar. And soon afterwards, while still in Barcelona, I learned of the University of Chicago's Gray Center for Art and Inquiry's collaborative Mellon grants, and put the question to Miralda. Miralda, I'm relatively good at writing grant proposals. Would you want me to give it a try? I think he had no idea what he was getting himself into. Though he must have been intrigued by the fact that Richard Gray's gallery was where your first show in the United States was, right?
Show in America, yes, in 1971.
Okay, so we agreed. I wrote the proposal. We were invited for an initial conversation, for which the Gray Center flew Miralda in from his second home in Miami on a very cold Chicago February day, all bundled up in a purple and turquoise polyester coat that Miralda called his sleeping bag. Now, long story short, the two of us eventually got the grant and wound up teaching a course entitled The Art and Anthropology of Food and Cuisine, together in the happier, more innocent days of the fall of 2019. Now, the Gray Center sponsored collaboration between me, a sociocultural anthropologist, and Miralda, a genuine pioneer of multidisciplinary food art, taught me a number of important lessons, both about my own discipline of anthropology and its signature method, ethnography, and about the nature of art, as practiced by Miralda. And I'll get to that in a minute. But let me first finish the story of our first collaboration. Since the pandemic made hash of our initial plans to present the results of our and our students' work at the Chicago Cultural Center, we decided to retool our efforts towards a series of whimsical 12-page inserts into Chicago's venerable city paper, The Reader, for which we found enthusiastic, eager support from local artists, anthropologists, historians, food writers, and chefs, whose enthusiasm for our project went down like butter. In the end, the 4 issues of the Chicago Food Culture Clarion that we published were the products of many minds, eyes, hands, and tongues. And I actually have them in my bag, where I should have brought them to the table, but anyway. Subsequently, Miralda taught a graduate course of his own at the University of Chicago as a visiting professor under the aegis of the Tinker Foundation's fellowship program in the fall of 2022. And that was a genuine first for the university to invite an artist on this fellowship. And from what I gathered, the class was a great success. I have a hunch of why this was so. In student evaluations for the course that we taught together in 2019, some voiced the complaint that Palmié talks too much. What they enjoyed was not what I said to them, but what Miralda did together with them. I mean, I entirely agree. A born ethnographer with boundless curiosity for other people's lives and experience and inimitable personal charm, Miralda imparted our students not with propositional knowledge, but with what the Dutch theorist Annemarie Mol, in a tellingly beautiful oxymoron, calls empirical philosophy. What she means by this is an inquiry not into what the world is, really and truly, but how it is done. Philosophy with the people in it, as another anthropologist named Tim Ingold once put it. People as they cook, eat, taste, digest, and reflect on their experience of doing so. Paraphrasing the title of one of my books, Wizards and Scientists, Explorations in Afro-Cuban Modernity and Tradition, I would say Miralda is the wizard. The however reluctant scientist. I'm the world's wordsmith. Miralda is the creator of worlds. Worlds which by design transcend the boundaries of the ineffable in their multimodal engagement of the individual sensorium and the kinds of collective experiences that, as Claude Lévi-Strauss once pithily argued, renders food, or rather, I would say, what humans collectively cook and eat, so good to think with. Do you want more theory? Anthropologists are, or at least were, supposed to be good at decoding exotic ritual in odd parts of the world. If so, then Miralda puts anthropological ritual theories to work in creating transformative events, which is one of the standard definitions of ritual. Think of the Eucharist, for example, or a Passover Seder, or initiation into a regla de ocho, for that matter. What do they all have in common? Eating a wafer and sipping bad wine, dipping parsley in salt water, or drinking a potion of herbs, blood, and water known as omiedo. All these will elicit biochemical reactions in your individual gustatory sensorium. No doubt about it. Your tongue and olfactory apparatus will register them, sending signals to your brain to whatever effect. But this is not what these rituals are about. And neither are any of Miralda's performative events just about ingesting something tasty. Like, for example, grilled or shrimp grilled on the motors of Seat cars on their pilgrimage from Barcelona to Girona, or cocktails based on Maggi cubes. What they are about is a deeply ingrained human proclivity towards social eating, not individual feeding as with other animals who similarly receive endorphin reactions when they fill themselves up. No, humans eat in company. Cum panis. Breaking bread together is what we all aspire to, not raiding one's fridge at night. Conversely, what are Lent or Ramadan about other than the creation and reproduction of collective identities through ritual fasting, as opposed to individual dieting, right? Surely this is not about weight loss as regards the individual bodies of Catholics or Muslims. No, they fast in order to affirm the collective body of the church or the ummah. Now, ritual brings out this aspect in the most pronounced fashion. Do this in remembrance of me, Jesus is supposed to have said at the Last Supper. But what he meant was, do this so that you not only become one with me, but with each other, and keep doing so. Hence the awesome mystery of the Eucharistic theophagia. How to eat one's God and have it too, we might say. But could we not invent such rituals on the fly? I mean, I can't speak for Miralda, but I imagine his response would be, yes, and we need to.
Of course.
So much hangs on such small but exceedingly important collective gestures. Sometimes in the 1990s, the theorist and art critic Hal Foster issued a scathing critique of anthropologists and artists who attempted to assume each other's roles. Now, from my disciplinary vantage point, I would say that Foster attacked windmills. And artists like Miralda have proved him wrong as well. Take Miralda's Magic Banquet, performed right around the corner from here in Little Haiti in 2019. There is no ethnographic gaze involved in the celebratory street parade, no shallow site-specificness. Miralda and Montse Guillen had lived there in a little casita shaded by avocado trees for decades. The participants, who did not belong to Miami's Haute Volée, and I presume the Rara band too, were their neighbors. I know that the gallerist who sponsored the event, Amanda Keeley, who's here tonight, was also their neighbor, and certainly there was no exotification or romantic showcasing of the other in an event centered on that humble worldly good, the Maggi bouillon cube, a thoroughly industrial product that has been part and parcel of Haitian culinary traditions for decades, to the point that there even is a Zhongzhou version as well. Fortunately, I wasn't there at the time, but the book, of course, that we will be presenting later on tonight has its origin in this very event. Now, to revert to an older moment in anthropological theory, Victor Turner once characterized the ritual moment as inductive of a liminal stage of anti-structure, as, for example, in carnivalesque performances of a world turned upside down. And then Turner booked that as a moment of social reproduction. Traditional rituals of rebellion, as his mentor Max Gluckman called them, ultimately serve to uphold the existing order. But could we not invent rituals that do not serve such a purpose, but instead act as catalysts for transformation? Could we not devise new forms of participatory engagement, generative of what Emil Durkheim more than a century ago called collective effervescence? And so, perhaps lead us to think and act otherwise, individually and collectively. This is, of course, exactly what Miralda does. Whether floating a giant banner of the seven-eyed lamb of the apocalypse, which was based on a medieval fresco stolen by the fascists from an abbey in the Pyrenees, floating that down Fifth Avenue, as you saw, introduced the likes of Warhol and Basquiat to Monseguillen's exquisite tapas at El Internacional, or organizing a street party around a cement truck, hormiguera, lined with images of a stomach's mucous membranes driving through Poblenou to celebrate resistance against this neighborhood's destruction, or rather digestion, by capital. And let us not forget Miralda's invention of San Stomac, whose fiestas have radiated out from Barcelona to Naples and now Rome. Food cultura, Miralda's and Guillen's signature concept of an archive in action, growing, moving, transforming. I was lucky to have been present at a reactivation of the lamb, Peccata Mundi, at Barcelona's Museo Nacional de Arte Catalana, and it featured not only music piped in from the storied organ of Barcelona's cathedral, but live medieval chants, roasted lambs, 7 medieval sauces in eye-shaped dishes, and a procession. What a synesthetic riot. What food for thought. Let me cut this a little bit short, but let me just say a few final words about Miralda in Miami. I mean, I think he played a sorely underestimated role in shaping a distinct and, I think, vital subcurrent in Miami's by now famous art scene. Let me tell you, I lived in your fair city for some 8 or 9 months in 1985, doing ethnographic research among Cuban santeros for my dissertation. Those of you old enough to remember those times will recall that Miami was a cultural desert back then. You were lucky if there was a stray show that premiered somewhere else and found its way to the night center, especially during the summer months.
That is true.
What is now the South Beach Art Deco district was considered a dangerous place at night. What with all those Marilitos that had settled there after 1980? The cocaine cowboys, Miami Vice, headlines in the Herald like animal sacrifices turned Miami River red. You know, it was a different city. Now, all of this has dramatically changed. And surely none of us would be here tonight were it any otherwise. But part of the reasons for this is not just the Biennale, the growth of Miami's arts district, and all the capital that is flowing towards it, which, you know, for better or for worse, is also beginning to destroy Little Haiti by, pricing people out of, their inhabitants out of their homes. And that, of course, Miralda's own, old habitat, chicken roaming the street, botanicas, and all that. So, all of this is undeniable, but the real reason for that change is the largely unsung agency of pioneers like him. He shaped the city just as much as it may have shaped him. And I think you should probably take a minute or two later to tell people about that. I mean...
His turn now.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, seeing all those chickens going on the street, I mean, this is something that is I couldn't believe it. I mean, you know, it's like, but is that life? All these, where do they went, the chickens? Where do they go? Where do they go? There's still some. There's still some.
Yeah.
I don't know. We can talk about later on when we have a drink.
I think that sounds like a plan, but the audience will probably not get your stories at that point. But let me just quickly finish, and then hopefully we'll have some questions and we can converse among ourselves. Miralda did change the city in perhaps small, but certainly indispensable gesture. I mean, that is one of the real reasons for why Miami is a place in the world of contemporary art. And whether number 47 will build a monstrosity next to Freedom Tower or not. I mean, these are troubling times. I'm not an American, but have lived here for 28 years, and I'm rather worried about what is happening around us. Still, to strike an optimistic note, I'd say, let them dance around such golden calves in however nihilistic a carnival of absurdities. Much of this won't matter that much as long as we keep Miralda and the Miami-based artists like him in mind. Resistance is possible. Yes. And the best form it can take are mundane acts of, shall we say, breaking bread together, slurping muggy bouillon cube or crumbling such cubes into your favorite homemade dish, thereby subverting their global capitalist birthmark. And doing this together. Pleasure and politics, aesthetics and activism, theory and ritual, art and food, they belong together, don't they? This has been Miralda's message all along, and it behooves us to make it our own as best as we possibly can.
Well said.
Thank you.